Everything he does throughout the book of John, he seeks his glory. And at the same time, when Jesus seeks his own glory, it's not a selfish thing, it's a loving thing. And maybe you're not convinced of that idea, and so that's why I want to go to the text, and I want to read a little bit of the book of John. So I'll be in John chapter 11. And I want to read the first 6 verses. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Throughout the Gospel of John, we always see examples of Jesus doing signs, multiplying the bread, healing the sick, to point to himself. So in John chapter 6, for example, when Jesus multiplies the bread, he uses the physical thing that he does for the people, namely giving them bread. He uses that to show who he is, that he's the bread of life. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus, by this time, is well known as a healer, as a person who's active in the public eye. So Jesus has already made friends with Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, and they come to him thinking they can trust Jesus, which they can't. And they say to him, Jesus, we know you have power. Come heal your friend Lazarus, because Lazarus is dying. And I think Jesus is being the most loving he can be in this verse, in this chapter, in this passage that I read. Because instead of going to instantly heal Lazarus, or to speak a word and heal Lazarus, Jesus considers it worthwhile. He loves them. He loves them, and he considers it worthwhile to allow Lazarus to die so that he might be seen for who he is, that he might be glorified. And so verse 4 says, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Jesus doesn't make any bones about it. He wants to glorify himself. He wants to show people who he really is. He wants to show them the fullness of who he is. He wants people to see how awesome and worthy of their worship he is. And so he's loving. And notice verse 5. He says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. It's not Jesus that says those words. It's John. John was a disciple of Jesus. John followed Jesus everywhere he went. So John makes a deduction. It says, Jesus loved them. It's not Jesus that says that. John, who sees what's going on. He's involved in the day-to-day life of the first century and the ministry of Jesus, and he says, now Jesus loved them. And the word love here is not a kind of a superficial, we love everyone because we're all Jews and we all love each other. No, the message communicates something very intimate, something that you hold them dear to your heart. They're precious to you. And just think about the ramifications of that. Jesus, who loves them, who cares for them deeply, allows Lazarus to die for the sake of his own glory. That's how he loves them. So, without further ado, I want to talk, now that I've talked about the motives of Jesus in the passage, I want to look to the text and see what Jesus does and what Jesus says to bring about his own glory. So, I want to read verses 17 through 27. It says as follows. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus was ill. He found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, and she's weeping. She says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. In this passage, Martha comes to Jesus and she's defeated. She doesn't see any other option. In the Jewish mindset, it's important that John includes that Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. He doesn't say 3, and he doesn't say 2. He says Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. What does that mean? In Jewish tradition, it was as if the body were in the grave 3 days, on the 4th day the soul left the body. And so the body would never come back from the dead, no matter what. And so, in their understanding, when Martha comes to Jesus, she comes really defeated. Because now 4 days have passed. Like, even if Jesus could have done something, which, even if Jesus could have done something, he can't do it anymore because 4 days have passed. And so she comes defeated, sorrowful, angry almost. And she bows down to Jesus and she lays the fault at his feet and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Which is true. And then Jesus looks to her and says to her in a tender, caring voice. We can't think of Jesus as a stoic, kind of rigid person. In a tender, caring demeanor, he says to her, your brother will rise again. And she has this understanding of Jesus. Well, Lazarus is dead. He's going to rise eventually when God comes back and on the day of judgment. But that's not what Jesus has in mind. When he says your brother will rise again, he wants to communicate something about himself. He wants to show his glory. He wants to show his power. And so in the Gospel of John, Jesus does a physical sign to show a spiritual reality. So when he multiplies the bread, he says he's the bread of life. In the same way here, it's reversed. Jesus says something spiritual, and then he communicates it. He shows what he's saying is true by doing something physical. So he says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. For Martha, this must have taken her breath away. For Jesus, their friend Jesus, who loved them, for Jesus to say such a statement, that I am the resurrection and the life, must have been strange almost. And hear me out. When Jesus says, I'm the resurrection and the life, he says, I have all the power in the world to not only resurrect people, but to give them life. He makes himself equal to God. He says, I have all the power in the world. There's no one that's like me in this regard. I am the one who gives life and sustains it. That's what he says. He makes a claim to be God. But I want you to realize something even more important about this passage. That when Jesus speaks of himself as the resurrection and the life, he qualifies it. He gives a little explanation about what he means by that when he's talking to Martha. And he doesn't just mean that he has the power to physically resurrect someone that's been dead for a while. He speaks that whoever believes, the one believing is the one alive, the one who sees Jesus, the one who desires him, the one who wants to make much of him in their life. They're the people that have been made alive by Jesus in the first place. And so for the Christian, in the passage that follows, in the resurrection of Lazarus, see your own story, see your own life. Because that's what Jesus communicates here. When he says, I am the resurrection and the life, whoever believes in me, the people believing are the people that have been made alive, been resurrected by Jesus. That's what he means. And we should see our own stories, that we were dead in the same way that Lazarus was dead, and Jesus, by his word, he speaks and has resurrected us from the dead, and has reconciled, like Paul said, to us in God. And so do you see what happened here? Martha has this perception of Jesus. Lord, you can only, you can heal people, you can stop them from dying. And Jesus blows away any limitations she has of him and says, no. He communicates, no, I can't. Of course I can stop people from dying, but I can also bring back the dead. Which in her mind only God can do. So he makes himself equal. He makes himself God here, and he glorifies himself. He shows himself for who he is in the passage. He says, that's me, I'm God. And at the same time, keep in mind what happened in John 11. He says that Jesus loved Mary and Martha. This is how he loves them, by showing of himself, by telling them who he is, by making known what he's about, why he came in the world. and thus to resurrect sinners and to save sinners.